Winston Churchill said, "We shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us." But what about virtual buildings? What can we learn from an environment where the community of people who actually use the buildings are empowered to create and continuously modify their environment on the fly? I'm John Bruscio from the Arch blog, and I'll share some thoughts about that in a minute. But very generally, I'd like to share some of the reasons I remain so optimistic about the future of virtual environments like Second Life. I'm coming at this from an architectural perspective, but I think that most of what I'm going to cover applies fairly universally to just about any virtual world endeavor. I'm going to be referring mostly to Second Life, so if you don't already have an account, you can do that at secondlife.com. This won't cost you anything, and once you're in, you'll be able to talk to other people in either text chat or in voice, and you'll also be able to build just about anything you can imagine using a very simple set of building tools. Now, because this is a user-generated world that's so vast that no single person can even keep track of it all, what you're essentially experiencing is the single largest collective expression of creativity in a single location that the world has ever seen. It's a kind of a cultural renaissance where you see people coming together from every conceivable profession to socialize and collaborate. Now, here's the part that got me hooked. If I create an object, and you're in Second Life from wherever you happen to be in the world, you can see that object appear in real time on your computer. Now, if I modify that object, you'll see that modification happening in real time on your screen. But more importantly, if I click some permissions, you can take what I just did and you can modify it. Now, that seemingly simple feature is what I think is a real game changer. There's simply no other software application available anywhere that enables multiple people to collaborate around their ideas in an immersive virtual environment for free. Nowhere else has this ever happened. So with these building tools, you can prototype just about anything you can imagine. But what's more is that you can share those ideas with others and you can see what the community thinks about it. There's hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people out there with accounts that could potentially test drive your idea. Again, that ability is simply unprecedented. And really what you see being done so far is very amazing, but in all reality it's a relatively small group of innovators and a few early adopters who are just scratching the surface of something that has tremendous potential. What we see happening now is the barriers to cross-disciplinary sharing and innovation are all but eliminated. And the fear to reach out to people is so much easier to overcome since you have so many more channels within which to communicate, and an even greater range of tools with which to express your ideas. And it's really the social component that serves as the glue that transforms the creative component from a solo experience into something much more collaborative. We're seeing individuals empowered with the ability to create, which essentially inverts the traditional top-down hierarchy of design development. Whether they happen to be your employees or your customers or your students, they can all be part of creating the experience, and that's really what collaboration is all about. Of course, collaborating around a 2D whiteboard or looking at the web or editing documents together in a virtual environment is compelling, but those are all two-dimensional things. The web already does two dimensions pretty well, and I think we can do even more with 3D, but we just haven't figured it all out yet. But what if the collaborative potential found in Wikipedia or open source software development jumped from 2 dimensions into 3? We've been taking a look at this potential with the Studio Wikitecture group and the 3D Wiki technology, where we're trying to build the tools that will help us take collaborative innovation to the next level. And I think we'll see virtual environments become the arena where Wikinomics and the wisdom of crowds principles make the transition from 2 dimensions into 3. Just like the web made the tools necessary for people to publish and collaborate around information-based projects to anyone with an internet connection, virtual worlds will bring the ability to publish and collaborate around 3D projects. So if you can be convinced that virtual worlds are at least worth exploring and maybe invest in some virtual land to start experiments with, what do you build? Who do you hire to build it, and what kind of architectural strategy is appropriate? There are lots of ways to approach this, but one of the first thing a lot of people do is they replicate the existing buildings that they occupy in real life into their virtual location. Now that does have some value if your building is iconic in some way, or if your goal is to use it for orientation or training or describing a design concept. But you can't expect your employees and customers to come to that place and spend time in it the way that they do in your real life building, because the virtual space is an entirely different context with an entirely different set of norms and expectations. The translation just isn't always apples to apples. That isn't to say that everything should just be floating around in empty space without any reference to physical reality whatsoever, because obviously we visually organize the world around us based on certain familiar patterns and visual cues, and we generally rely on those cues to help us find our way around in any environment, real or virtual. For example, you might not need a roof to protect you from the elements, but that overhead plane visually organizes a space and defines a boundary, and so it serves a very meaningful purpose. Even though you can fly, a stair or a ramp still visually indicates that there's something above where you are now, and it invites you to explore it. This brings me to a point that I find myself coming back to time after time, which is that I think virtual environments actually behave and should be treated more like a liquid than a solid artifact. The pattern that we so often see is companies spending a lot of money early on and trying to lock into something final, and in most cases they're reluctant to change it after it's completed. And then when nobody visits anymore, they shut it down and maybe even blame the platform or the community for that failure. One way to think about all this is that we understand the existing trajectory that we see with Web 2.0, being all about creativity, collaboration, sharing, online communities, social networking, and so on. But somehow when we jump from 2D web into 3D, it seems like we're leaving some of that innovation behind, and we're resorting back to the old school habits of trying to build a kind of heavy-handed or control-based experience. So it seems like something's getting lost in translation. And I think that this disconnect is only natural because the virtual world, being 3D, feels more like architecture. And we typically don't think of architecture as something that can be as flexible as words can be in a two-dimensional web. Architecture is just far too expensive to be able to constantly change it and modify it. And we're used to the habit of designing it once, building it, and just kind of hoping that it works. We can't be too experimental with it because we can't afford to. It's really up to us to fit into the building rather than the building fitting the way we actually need to use it. Like Winston Churchill said, we shape our buildings and afterwards our buildings shape us. Think about that. Our buildings shape us, mostly because we have no choice. Buildings are just too expensive to modify. But there's absolutely no reason to drag that limitation into virtual worlds. In Second Life, we can shape our virtual buildings and afterwards we can keep shaping them. I don't think I can overstate how fundamentally profound that opportunity really is, and how dimly aware we are of the potential that virtual worlds hold, both now and into the future. I think it's absolutely worth the time it takes to take a look at how people and organizations are using Second Life to their advantage, and consider how you or any community you're involved with could tap into the creative, social, and collaborative potential that's afforded by virtual environments. So I could go on all day, obviously, but I'll stop there for now. And if you have any questions, again, you can find my contact info and more about virtual architecture on the Arch blog at archsl.wordpress.com.